Welcome back. We hope you were able to start making some connections in the networking area, and I'm sure you're looking forward to this next panel. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused many hardships worldwide, as electric companies and those in other sectors work to keep their employees, customers, and communities safe. This session will focus on the impacts of the pandemic, not just in the energy industry, but in the world at large. Our panelists will also reflect on what we can learn from COVID-19 and how we can prepare for future black swans and other unknown unknowns on the path to 2050. This panel features Gioia Getzi of Azienda Trasporti Milanesi, Calvin Butler of Exelon Utilities, Jay Grual of Manitoba Hydro, and Nigel Barbour of PowerCo. The session will be moderated by Michael Cushman of the Da Vinci Institute. Please welcome them all to the stage for our final session of the day, Thriving in a Post-Pandemic World.
Welcome, everyone. We are having a little technical difficulty with one of our members, and as soon as Jay is able to join us, she will, and we'll have questions for her. I'd like to say we have a very optimistic title on this panel. We're not quite through the woods yet, and I'm not sure we'll ever be post-pandemic, but we did have some long-term benefits of getting through a whole year of this, and it's made some changes in the industry. We are having a little technical difficulty with one of our members. Okay, well, I apologize for any of the technical echo we had there. I'm going to jump right into the questions since we lost a few minutes. This first question is for Gioia and then Calvin.
Okay.
The main point of the keynote, Radical Uncertainty, is that typical economic and financial models seek to optimize within a window of certainty. And the main point of the keynote was that uncertainty is actually becoming dominant, and that models don't necessarily work in just a perfect world. So what has, or perhaps is still is your biggest challenge regarding COVID, and what are you doing now, or are you continuing to do that you will do to adjust from COVID?
Joy, did you want to start that, or do you want me to start that one, Michael?
Why don't you start, Calvin?
Okay, sure, no problem. First off, let me just say thank you to EEI and you for bringing this important topic to the table. As you stated in your opening, is that we're just getting started in this. So we still are learning and evolving through this process as you've outlined. And I think the biggest thing for us at Exelon is always and foremost the safety of our employees and our communities in which we serve. So when you put the safety element out there, you can imagine during the pandemic, all the things we had to go through, from acquiring the appropriate level of PPE to making sure social distancing, understanding that half of my workforce, half of the 34,000 employees were showing up in the office every day. And when you put that, they were out in the field, engaging away from their families and trying to, one, stay healthy, but keep the lights on and the gas flowing. So when you think about how we do that, now people aren't traveling in trucks together. Now, and guess what? Throughout all of this, the storm season was still in full force. So people are traveling to other states to give mutual assistance. People are coming to us to give mutual assistance. And how do you then station them in terms of being able to provide that key service that you and others come to expect? You know, we were renting out whole hotel floors. We were providing box lunches, box dinners. We were staging in a very remote location to ensure everyone was protected. But the thing that jumped out to us in this pandemic environment is that the commitment of the employees was always there. And it raised the level of importance. You think about how we started today with the technical difficulties. Now everyone's working from home. Kids are being educated at home. And the importance of reliability and resiliency was at a heightened level, because now your patience is far thinner for any lapses in connectivity. When we went out to do work, our communication level was several layers deep in terms of talking to our customers and how we engage with them. So from a safety to reliability and just engagement with our communities, all of that was important, and it will really shape how we do business in the future. So I'll stop there because I know we'll go deeper later, but that was just the foundational level of what we had to accomplish.
Joya?
Thank you, Michael, and I also want to thank you for inviting me here. I lead a transport organization in a medium-sized city. And we experienced with our employees many of the problems that Calvin already described, so I won't go over them. Obviously, one of the key issues that we faced and we are still facing is that, by definition, public transport is shared. And in a pandemic, obviously, that poses a gigantic challenge. So we had to not only keep the lights on, but increase our offer so that we could ensure safe distancing for people. So our costs went up immensely because we had to provide more transport, more sanification, PPE for all the employees, and the secure environment for them. And we had to match this with the demand that, again, as we all know, in a pandemic goes down a lot. So the business model got very challenged, right? Our costs screwed up, and our revenues went down. So it's a very classical business problem, but it was accelerated to a very, very high degree by the pandemic, and still is.
Thank you. So, I mean, the big themes probably are safety and being adaptive under those circumstances. The next question is for Nigel. People tend to underestimate their ability to cope in a crisis. Can you give us an example of how your employees demonstrated excellent coping skills?
Thanks, Michael, and thanks EEI for organising today and the number of sessions they've got going, and Lawrence and his team for all the work they did, particularly last year when COVID first hit, and sort of keeping us globally connected. Even though we're down here in the bottom of the world in New Zealand, it's still great to hear and share experiences. And I'd just like to sort of acknowledge in the first language of New Zealand the authority of my co-panelists and everyone on the call and the dialogue we're about to have. So, ina mana, ina rea, tēnā koutou. In terms of change, Michael, the team were amazing. The big things were, in terms of the ability to cope, it was the whole change. It was, I think New Zealand went from one case at the end of February to all of a sudden we were in the hard lockdown at the end of March. And it was all happening around us, but we got everyone home or working in socially distanced ways very quickly. And I think that change and the pace at which we did it, Calvin and Goya and Jay probably have experience. In a normal sense, change like that takes time, but for whatever reason, we all had a common goal. We all had a common goal around getting out, working safely, keep it working safely, and also keeping the power on and gas flowing to our customers. And as a result, we just got, IT systems got rolled out. They all went in a day or two. We sent everyone home. Everyone was actually on live virtually. And normally this stuff would have taken us 6 months to do. It was happening in days. And I think also the speed at which the team then said, actually, it's not just about us working safely and keeping the power. Have we got vulnerable customers out there we should be thinking about? Should we be thinking about not only those that are vulnerable in a physical or destructive sense, but also customers who might be vulnerable because of the financial shock? And so within a week, we'd sort of thought, well, actually, what's the bones of loosely, I think we called it a COVID sort of assistance package we put out there, which was voluntary for our major customers to adopt if they wanted to or not, and all that. So it was just that whole speed and pace and ability to cope with change, I think, was the most impressive aspect. And it just sort of, people probably went into it thinking, how we're going to, I know in the first couple of days it was all a bit scary, but then within a week, it was all routine and the collaboration kept up. The vibe around the company was good.
Great, thank you. I'm told that we can actually communicate with Jay, so we're not going to see her, but she can hear us and answer. So Jay, I'd like you to answer the same question, which basically was, people tend to underestimate their ability to cope in a crisis. Can you give us some examples of how your employees were able to cope?
We continuing to operate at this point in time. The other thing for us is Manitoba Hydro. We're building a major new hydro generation project in northern Manitoba. It's an $8.7 billion project. And when you think of it, it's a camp that at its peak, we had 2,400 employees. So literally, we were building a project in an environment where you had a cruise ship. And so the effort and the risk assessment and analysis that we had to do to be able to continue to keep the project moving and going forward, because every day that we were not able to move the project forward as we were figuring out how to deal with COVID protocols would cost us almost $1 million in the project. So we worked with the regional and provincial health authorities. We worked with the Indigenous communities in the north because they were understandably very concerned, because our teams at site were not just only domestic, i.e. within Manitoba and from Canada. We were drawing on experts actually globally that were coming in, given that we were getting to the commissioning stage. So it was really about empowering the team to work with all of the parties to try to come up with solutions, and really rigorous risk assessment and scenario planning to layer protocols on top of protocols. And we've only had one outbreak during this entire time. And even then, with the protocols that we had in place at site, we were very quickly able to contain it and to keep the project going. But and we're continuing to keep it going. But it was really that rigorous risk assessment and working with all the stakeholders and parties to continue to have the social license to continue to move the project forward. And I'm thrilled to say that we've commissioned the first of the 7 turbines, and the second one is in pre-commissioning as we speak.
Thank you. On a similar theme, this is for Calvin and Nigel. What new skills or attitudes do employees need today that were less important before COVID?
Wow, I don't know if it was less important before COVID, but I think they're being called on more often now, right? The ability to be flexible, the ability to adjust on the fly. To piggyback off what Nigel was saying and Jay and so forth, is that, think about it, we moved 96% of our call center employees to working from home within 7 days. And if you'd have asked me, was that possible prior to the pandemic, I would have said absolutely not. And part of one of the biggest hurdles there would have been the culture. But when we had to, the partnership with our IT organization and the transition of those employees was amazing. And we didn't miss a beat. I already alluded to the storm season. We were able, and we finished 2020 with the highest reliability we had in our company history across our utilities. That's with the storms, that's with remote call center employees, and half of our employees off-site. So that's the type of adaptability and flexibility they need to continue to show. The key skill that we've continuously emphasized is that, one, putting customers first. And I don't want to lose that sentiment, because that was so important, because Nigel referred to the moratoriums that we put in place to help our customers, how we lean into our communities in which we serve, and having a level of empathy when we had people calling us, seeking assistance and not knowing where to turn, and how do we connect them with government agencies. That still continues today. And that has been the foundation of what we've had to accomplish. I think core to all of this, Michael, has been, but for having a firm foundation for how the utilities would move forward, this would have been more difficult. As I've said to all of my team, I said, we were able to be flexible and to adjust relatively on the fly because we had a solid foundation. And we have to continue to build off that because those skills are going to be needed in 2021, 22. And as you said, I don't know if we're ever going to get back to that where it was. And maybe we shouldn't, because we have to build upon what we've learned and really become better as a business.
Great. Nigel?
So I think, just building on what Colvin said, it's that solid core and that flexibility. It was impressive how we all moved at pace, and generally from the perspective of what's right for our customers, what's right for keeping our people safe, to sort of get everyone working from home, and just how quickly we did stuff that previously would have taken us months or years to do. And it's keeping that. And I think if I was talking about this yesterday with one of the New Zealand sector regulators, and I think one of the longer term lessons is, if working from home or pandemics are going to be with us for a longer time, or something else, is the traditional regulatory model that values and that says effectively residential areas have the lowest value in terms of lost load, so therefore you invest the least in terms of your infrastructure, and industrial is the highest and you invest the most. Are those type of models correct going forward? So I put the challenge down with the regulator, have a think about that, because residential suburbs were our call centres. Everyone, that was our head office. We were being run out of all sorts of parts of the North Island of New Zealand. Are those traditional ways that the regulator thinks about it also right? So I think it's not only for us, but it's also sort of some of the regulatory models and some of the deep-rooted engineering assumptions that sit underneath things that we're all contemplating now, what it means in the future. So.
Great. Yeah, it's amazing. All the changes happen.
Yeah.
This is for everyone, but maybe we can start with Joya. So many developing countries are planning significant investments in infrastructure and sustainability. What initiatives are you most enthusiastic for, and why?
I think it has to be to do with sustainability and climate change. COVID has taught us a very hard lesson on disregarding a threat. We all knew, governments knew that pandemics do come. A lot of us have been caught, unaware with pandemic plans that were old, etc. We all know not only that climate change is coming, but that it is actually here. For a huge number of reasons that we do not have the time to go into now, there is reluctance in tackling the problem now, while it is very serious, but it is still manageable. And I think and hope that this will be taken on its head now, and that the investments will go in making all of the changes we can make now with the technologies we already have to move towards a sustainable future. On my part, the transit authority that I lead will go completely zero emissions by 2030 on all of our transport system. This requires a major investment and a major shift on its head, but it is also possible from an economic point of view and the business model point of view. So it was, left to us to take the decision and try to sort out how to make it work. And we did, and I hope many others will follow suit in taking a different mindset of doing now all that we can do now.
Maybe we can hear from Jay.
Thank you. And then, picking up on the theme of the electrification of transportation. In Canada, where, Manitoba Hydro is the utility for the province of Manitoba, Electricity is regulated provincially. And there's approximately 30 billion plus that the federal government is going to be investing in sustainability and infrastructure. And so one of the initiatives relates to the electrification of transportation, or the electrification of the Trans-Canada Highway, which is a highway that extends from the Pacific coast to the Atlantic coast. And to be able to facilitate that in a model where you have some provinces that are hydro-based, and then in between, you have provinces where they're primarily fossil fuel based in terms of their source of energy. And the real push is not on the residential, you and I and the vehicles we drive, but the fleets that move goods throughout Canada. And how do you build out that system and the new regulatory models and the constructs? And how do you actually plan your grid and your system for reliability when you've got totally new draws on your load and the predictability of it? So I'm excited about that, including thinking through the challenges and how to bring that forward. The second piece I'm really excited about is green hydrogen, or hydrogen in general, but from our perspective, green hydrogen. And why am I excited about green hydrogen? Because it's a source of energy that does not require the same infrastructure to move what has typically been green electrons. You don't need to build the huge transmission systems and go through the multi-year process for approvals and the build of them, where you can actually move green hydrogen much further to new markets, and it's green energy. And it's also, depending on how you do it, a form of energy storage. So I'm excited by both of those from a sustainability and infrastructure investment. And I think the opportunities are huge if you are able to create that green energy and to balance between different sources of energy that are fossil fuel based and not, to really push that whole GHG agenda.
Great. How about you, Nigel?
Thanks, Michael. So I think, clearly, globally developed nations are looking at, how they recover pandemic and invest. So there is a lot of money going into sustainability, really across both spectrums. One is resilience to climate change. So in New Zealand, there's been a big focus on, okay, well, not only how do we get to sort of net zero in terms of carbon by 2050 investments, but how do we actually adapt our engineered infrastructure to cope? So there's a big focus on that, and then also sort of the net carbon zero. I think the debates around that are where's the priorities in a system that's already, the electricity system, which is roughly 25% of total primary energy, is already 86% renewable. So do you focus on the last 10%-ish in the electricity system, or do you actually go with electrification first of transport? And I think at the moment, sort of, there's a big focus on transport. I think just picking up a point that Jay mentioned, and something that I'd sort of add to sort of that discussion, hopefully, is I think as we think ahead, and this probably applies across all sort of a whole lot of regulatory jurisdictions, is at the moment we've got often federal governments or likes with very keenly leaning into electrification and resilience investments around sustainability, but we've got the economic regulator. Its statutory framework or legislative framework is driven more by, well, let's just take what we've done in the past, and it's all about forecasting the future, and we forecast the future based on the past models. Whereas we've got these, the federal government or the high authority saying, look, we're going to break the past models. We want to do something quite radically different. And we've caught a bit in this thing where we're being led by forecasts in terms of what the rate case is versus led by policy. And there's something we're starting to have an active debate in New Zealand. And then the other thing is, and Jay mentioned this around build times, particularly on New Zealand, probably sounds a bit like Canada. Getting new power infrastructure, or transmission lines, even major distribution circuits through, is actually really hard with getting the landowner consents, the required environmental approvals. It can be 10 years roughly to get a new line of any substance built. If we want to be able to deliver on the infrastructure investment to help us decarbonise, there also needs to be, how do we actually get through these roadblocks? That prioritisation from the peak government bodies needs to flow further down the chain to more the bodies further that are subsidiary to it, so that the message gets through. We're being very policy led on this. We want to do this stuff, and we're going to help you actually expedite it, because there's a lot of projects that are just stuck in this bottleneck. They look shovel ready, but they've already got bogged down in the planning processes, and could be years before the investment happens.
How about you, Calvin?
Well, the great part about being on a panel with three very smart people is you get to kind of say, I agree, right? And it's really good. But the other piece I'll take to this conversation is the pandemic has forced all of us to take a step back and say, wow, the disparate impact on communities in need has really impacted those more than everyone else. So when we talk about this green economy and where this investment's to go that everyone's been talking about, the insurance that certain communities will not get left behind. So what I'm excited about in all of this discussion is that it's put at the forefront that we cannot leave those communities behind, whether it's urban centers or rural areas. We have to make sure we look at our investments and levelize it across, that everyone is benefiting, because we do know that the environmental conditions that everyone has spoke of disparately impact Black and brown communities more than anyone else. So when we talk about transportation electrification, when we talk about building the grid of the 21st century, what are we doing in those communities that really need it? So what I'm excited about in the regulatory jurisdiction in which Exelon operates, 6 urban centers, we're having conversations with the commissions and the governors talking about, are you going to partner with us to invest in those communities that are in need? And then when you look at the Biden administration and what they're proposing at the federal level, they're saying, let's look at that investment and make sure we don't leave communities behind. So that's what I'm excited about, Michael, because the pandemic has brought all of that to light. We know where the disparities are, but now people are really addressing it at the forefront of all these conversations.
Great. That's a great segue to the next question. I was on that one already. So why don't we have Jay answer this question? So it's really basically the same thing. We now have globally 100 million more people in severe poverty. And we've known, as Calvin just mentioned, that it's really the working poor that have been hit the most by this pandemic. What recommendations do you have for government as well as for business to address this problem?
Well, I think Calvin touched on it, and effectively, we call it energy poverty. And for example, here in Manitoba, which is, you've got this huge grid, and we're an integrated utility, generate, transmit, and distribute. But as the evolving energy landscape moves forward, as there will be different options, particularly intermittent renewables, that our customers will have an opportunity to use as a source of energy. Those that have the least stability to be able to, they don't have access to the capital or credit rating or the like to use some of these other sources of energy, are going to be left connected to this big grid and infrastructure, which is a very high fixed cost structure. And so implicitly, when the number of customers changes or goes down, their cost for their energy will go higher, and they are exposed to energy poverty. So it's really, how do you work both federally and provincially to shape, and we're using energy policy to do that, to ensure that those realities don't occur, and that as the evolving energy landscape moves forward, you take those assets, you optimize the value of every single electron, so no single customer group or those that are most economically disadvantaged bear more of an impact, and the implications of that. But it is a social problem and not just a problem that is an issue that the utilities need to focus on. It's also the regulators, it's social policy at a provincial level, federal level, and it's engaging with all of those parties, as Calvin was saying, to try to come up with the optimal solution where you're well aware of what the unintended consequences might be, so you ensure that they do not materialize.
Okay, and now Joya has been nodding a lot, and she would like to have a few words on this topic.
No, I think it's such a critical topic, not leaving anyone behind. I just want to remind all of us really of the importance of accessibility to public transport. The ability for people to move and to move in an affordable way is absolutely critical in not leaving anyone behind. In Italy, as an example, any ticket you pay for trains or buses or trams are covering about 1/3 of the operating cost. The price of the ticket is only 1/3 of the operating cost. The rest, the government at different levels comes in. And I think this is a fundamental point in one way, in not leaving anyone behind, and secondly, in moving faster towards a sustainable society. Because if most people do choose a shared transportation system, then it's much easier to move towards electrification and more sustainable generation of power. So the two things, social justice and sustainability, go hand in hand.
Great. Okay, Nigel, I'd like you to answer this next question for me, and then if someone else has a strong opinion about it, we'll open it up for them as well. But how did your decision process for your most critical decisions take place, and what decision are you most proud of?
We really sort of almost went to sort of a business continuity type process. So normally when this is in the very first days of the pandemic, and so we collapsed it down. So speed to make things, normally decisions around things take time, and you try to build a consensus internally as a leader before you sort of get the stuff done. We're actually saying, no, we've got a genuine emergency, so we're going to collapse the process down. You need to trust us, and we'll trust you as a result. And I think that whole collapsing and just making decisions at speed and the resulting, I think the two things we were due for our employee engagement surveys, and we did them during the lockdown period, just one of them schedules. And what I'm quite proud of is actually the engagement levels were higher. The feedback was we felt that our leaders had our backs, and actually were doing right by us, which I thought was really positive. And I suppose sort of the thing I was most proud of is actually not the decisions I made, but the framework we put in place and the decisions the team underneath me made. They felt empowered to do the stuff to make things happen for customers and keeping the power on and gas flowing. And that's the bit I was most proud of. It just happened. And I'd find out the next morning when I dialed in, it's like, oh yeah, we've done this. And it's great. It's amazing. Yeah.
Anyone else want to answer? Oh, yep. We got you on mute. Calvin.
Gotcha. I'll weigh in, and very similar to Nigel, we operated from a business continuity. On a daily basis, we implemented a crisis management team call with all of the top 20 executives across Exelon. And then shortly thereafter, I always would do, or right before, a CEO call with the CEOs who reported into me that ran our 6 utilities. And a couple of things jumped out. I think one of the best decisions we made was jumping out early and putting a moratorium in place from any further disconnections. That, that allowed our customers to take a deep breath, right? And it allowed our utilities to really sit back and think about how are we going to engage? Because I think it was Joya who said early on, the business model started getting flipped on its head, right? You're operating and the revenues are not coming in. And really what it allowed us to do was to partner with our jurisdictions. And that was something where we had to all just step aside and say, what's in the best interest of the communities in which we serve? I think another big thing that I was most proud of from the team, though, is how we supported each other. We talk about the well-being, kids are now at home, parents are having to work from home. What are we doing around childcare? What are we doing around making sure that we were providing access and reliability to all of our employees, and the emotional, not only the physical well-being, but the emotional well-being of our employees was always at a forefront. One of the things we did early on, after about, not early on, but maybe a month, I just had to implement a no call zone within the day, from 12 to 1 Eastern, 11 to 12 Central, no phone calls, because people were letting me know they were working 24 hours, they were grinding, and they were missing that time with their family and the time just to have a mental break. And for the first week, it was very difficult because everyone had to sit back and take that responsibility of scheduling no calls. But after about a week, if I'd have said we're going to have some calls between 12 and 1, they would have had a mutiny on my hand, because they appreciated that time just to go out for a walk or to have lunch with their kids who are working from home, or just to do whatever. But it was that mental well-being. And to Nigel's point, the fact that we showed we cared about what they were doing at home and how their well-being was overall went a long way.
Very cool. Hey, Joya, and this is also for Jay. During the lockdown, so just as Calvin's mentioning, everybody quickly switched as much as possible to digital and remote work. So going forward, what would be your combination of remote and in-person that you would want to see the new normal?
I think a healthy, balanced diet where you have both components, obviously where possible. If you have to drive, in my case, a bus or a tram, it's very hard to do that from home for the moment. The time will come when you will be able to also do that. But where possible, I think that people want a bit of both. And definitely the freedom and possibility to stay at home sometimes, it's definitely necessary to be together, to think together, to sit in a room together, to discuss together, to produce good work. What we are looking into in the city of Milan is also the near working possibility and the 15 minutes city concept. So we're working with a number of very big companies, IBM, Siemens, Accenture, and others, in providing part of their space for other people to be able to near work in their offices. As all of us, I think, will go down to an occupancy that will go down from 90, 85% to 60, we'll have spare room in our offices that we can lend to people who live nearby. And let's remember, speaking of social justice, the possibility of working from home is for the privileged, who have good internet, good access, good rooms, separation. If you live in 2 rooms with 2 young kids, it's very, very difficult. So near working could offer, for part of the time, part of the solution as well, where you have a safe, heated or cooled, nice office, but that allows you the flexibility of being very near to your home and save maybe a couple of hours commute per day in your life, which is very, very important.
So for our employees at Manitoba Hydro, What we did up front is probably after about 4 months of, we're effectively 70-30. 70% of our employees are working in some remote manner and 30% are not. And the 30% are primarily those that are on the front line serving our customers day in and day out, and all of the support that they need, whether it's from a logistics, supply chain, et cetera perspective. But having said that, when we did survey our employees to say, how are you finding it? And we did 2 different surveys. We surveyed our employees in general, and then we surveyed anybody that is in a leadership management role to ask how they're finding that it worked. And what we found is that in general, it was working really well, and productivity was actually improved in the routine, tactical, non-strategic work. But where we were struggling somewhat is the kind of work that would be transformational, because we're undergoing a fundamental redesign of our business, both from a people, process, technology, and data perspective. So what we decided to do is to let our employees tell us, what do they want the new normal to be? And so we're engaging them, and we're using a very diversified team, diversified from the perspective, not only from drawing across all parts of the business, but secondly, representing all different segments of our employees, in terms of where you are personally in your life and your career, to really pull that together. Right now, what are we hearing? Nobody wants to work remotely 100% of the time, but more importantly than anything, they want flexibility. Don't hardwire to say you're going to come in 2 days a week and 3 days a week, but to come up with a model that is based on the work that you need to do, and when do you need to engage with your colleagues to create a better outcome, better solutions, and when is it that you can and you should have that flexibility to choose to work at home. So we actually have a team that's working on this, and we're targeting hopefully September as to when we will start to implement it. But we've said, you tell us, because they know best, and they've proven it again and again and again. As we mobilized and solutioned around how to shift when COVID first materialized, we're leaving it to them to come back to us. And we've just put a couple of parameters and principles around it. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they come back with, because I trust them to come back with something that's going to be better than if we tried to do this more at the leadership level.
Thank you, Jay. That's very interesting. So at different important points, Joya bringing out the point that it's not always easy for everyone to work from home, and that you have to take that in consideration. And then we have the importance of the individual knows what's best for them as well. So you can't necessarily force it one way or another. So we have enough time for one more question. I'd like everybody to have a shot at it. So here's the question, and why don't we start with Nigel? So the last question is, how has the pandemic changed your thoughts about leadership? And can you share with us any experience that you've had recently during COVID that influenced your thinking?
Look, it's a big question. It's I think it reinforced aspects, and there's this great Maori proverb, which effectively, hei tangata, hei tangata, hei tangata, which is it's the people, it's the people, it's the people. That's what mattered. And the whole COVID thing just reinforced that. And as a leader, you had to go out on the limb, you had to be authentic, you had to be empathetic, you had to expose yourself to sort of, if you're like, where I'm sitting at the moment is not my normal home office. It's just because I don't want to disturb the kids and the wife, because they're in the part of the house where the home office is near, and it's ridiculously early, or was when we started this call in New Zealand. But it's people understand that actually you're in it with them, and you are, and you're allowed to have a day where you just chat it, because the CEO's role and leader's role is to inject energy into the organisation. And in COVID, in times of great uncertainty and rapid change, you are injecting massive amount of energy into it, and occasionally you will just be exhausted because you're lifting everyone else up. And so I think it reinforced sort of the importance of being really empathetic. Your role is to inject energy and to encourage people in that. But actually, don't be afraid to sort of say, actually, guys, I just need a day off. I've just had it. I've injected that much energy. I need to charge my own batteries and focus on myself.
Wow.
That whole authenticity point. So, yeah.
Interesting. How about you, Jay?
It's a very good question. And I had to step back and think, I very much enjoy being out in the field and talking to our employees on the front line and engaging on a regular basis. And when we moved into this environment where you're operating remotely, as is 70% of the organization, I had to step back and think, almost to what Nigel was saying, what is my role and how do I actually do that differently in this new environment? How do you remain visible? How do you consistently demonstrate support for your employees? And how do you engage with them in a way where it's going to be a two-way dialogue versus a one-way dialogue? So from an engagement perspective, for me personally, I had to really shift to a multi-channel model where engaging with employees, speaking with them, and creating the channels or the opportunities for feedback to come back through very much a multi-channel model. It also caused me to step back and say, there's probably things that I need to do that are more targeted. And so I probably spend more time talking to the broader organization and allowing the organization to choose if they want to attend a town hall. And we record everything and put it up. But what we've started to do is give them the opportunity in advance to say, what do they want to know about? What are the questions that they have? What would they like their leadership? And it's not just about me, but leadership in general. We also changed our internal website, our intranet, so it operates more like a social media site, where as we continue to post different articles and videos and the like about our business and our customers and our employees, people can like, and then they can share, as well as they can comment on it. And we actually monitor the comments and make sure we respond to everything. But it's a very different way to engage than what we did in the past. We had to consciously step back and say, how do we support the organization? And what's most interesting is that this has resulted in the layers actually flattening between the person at the very front line serving our customers through to all the way to a role like myself, which I really appreciate, because I think, what I've always said to our employees is we all have a role to play in serving our customer. It's just the role we play is different. And each role is important.
Excellent. What do you think, Joya?
Fascinating what I heard, and I want to go back though to something that Nigel, I think, was saying in a few moments ago, and it's the fact that in a crisis, decision making became much faster, and people became much more empowered. That's also been my experience, our experience. And the question I have, for which I do not have a good answer, is how to maintain that, without a crisis. Because I do think that it is a much more rewarding way of working for everyone. And so I think if collectively everyone, like Jay was saying, in his or her role, we were able to maintain that engagement on one side and that accountability and rapidity of responsiveness, that would be such a nicer way of working for everyone.
Calvin?
Yeah, Michael, a great question. And I, when you asked the question, I initially thought of two things. One, and I'll hit those. But the first being, not only as a leader, as an executive, but as an African-American executive during a pandemic and in the midst of this social unrest. It impacted me as a leader in so many different ways because I was leading an organization of 16,000 people, but I was also dealing with my own underlying feelings of what was going on in our country at the time. And how do I maintain my level of engagement? And as Nigel was talking about, put on that face of we have to continue to remain focused and we can't disappoint because we have big jobs. So that was a difficult time. And what I learned from that is that I just had to be very transparent with my team. I had to let them know the struggles that I was having, watching all of this on the news 24/7, and having to balance that with staying focused on the job. And what I said to them, I said, if I'm dealing with this, I know you are, and it's okay. So I had to create a safe space for us to have these conversations over Zoom, over Microsoft Teams, WebEx, whatever format. I had to create a zone where we can just be very authentic with one another and have these conversations, because that was very important for us to move forward, not to ignore what was happening, but to continue to move forward. And I use the example of a relative of mine, and I'll close with this on, is that a junior executive at a large bank, high achiever in all measures, undergrad, graduate school. And she was on a Sunday afternoon. She's a mother of three, ages 12, 10, and 8 girls, primary caregiver. Her husband had his own business, but it fell to her. And she had told my aunt, her mother, that she was quitting her job. And it struck me, and I called her and I said, what's going on? She called to quit her job, and her leader said, I'm not going to let you do that. Take a week or two and think about it. But the reality of it was she had reached a level where she wasn't doing, she felt, either one of the jobs as a caregiver or an executive well. And she wasn't built like that. So she said something had to give. And of course, the family wasn't going to give. So she was ready to quit her job. And but for her leader listening and having an empathetic tone and saying, no, I'm not going to let you do that, she would have lost a very valued employee. So what I shared that with my leadership team, and I said, what this means for you is that you have to be very intentional about your leadership right now. You have to engage with your employees at all levels, because you never know what someone is going through. And I think the pandemic and everything that we dealt with in 2020 really forced us to look at leadership in that way. It can't be just authority driven. It has to be collaborative, and we're in this together, and let's manage through it. That's what I've learned.
Wow. I don't know what I could add to that. Time-wise, we are right on the button. So I want to thank everyone in our panel and all our listeners for joining us. I am illuminated. I am very honored to have met all of you today. And I appreciate you giving just heartfelt answers about, really, it's been a difficult time, and it's not quite over, but hopefully the title is right and we're getting at least post-COVID, let's put it that way, within the next year or so for most of the people in the world. That's it. I think we're done. So thank you again, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care
Bye-bye.
and stay safe.
Take care.
Thank you again to all of our panelists for such an insightful conversation. This concludes our programming for today, and we hope you enjoyed day one of EEI's 5th Annual Global Electrification